Of all the edicts carved into the foundations of the celestial realm, the most absolute, the most unyielding, was the prohibition against communion with the created. We, the host, the luminous children of the divine will, were the shepherds, the silent guardians, the unseen hands that gently nudged the great tapestry of mortal existence, according to a design far grander than any single thread could comprehend. To interfere was to unravel. To love was to fall. This is not merely my story, for a single voice cannot contain the symphony of joy and sorrow that such a transgression births. It is the story of many a chorus of whispered secrets and roaring rebellions that began in the stillness between heartbeats, in the quiet observation of a world so terrifyingly fragile, so breathtakingly beautiful that its very existence seemed a miracle against the cold, perfect eternity of our home. Our home, the Empyrean, was a realm of pure, undiluted essence. Light was not something that fell from a sun. It was the very substance of the air, the ground, the structures of thought and song that we called palaces. We did not walk. We moved with the grace of intention. We did not speak in the crude manner of vibrating air. We communed through interwoven strands of light and harmony, a language of pure meaning that left no room for misunderstanding. There was no pain, no hunger, no fear of an ending. There was only the serene, everlasting fulfillment of our purpose, to serve, to witness, to glorify the source of all. And witness we did. From our vantage, the mortal world, Terra, was a swirling jewel of violent blues and lush greens. A cacophony of life and death played out on a scale both infinitesimally small and cosmically vast. To most of the host, it was a subject of study, a complex and often perplexing creation to be observed with detached curiosity. Like physicians charting the fever dreams of a patient, we noted the rise and fall of empires, the blossoming of art in the shadow of war, the enduring spark of hope in the deepest despair. It was fascinating, but it was distant. For a few of us, however, that distance became an unbearable chasm. We were the watchers, assigned to the closer orbits, our consciousnesses brushing against the upper layers of Terra's atmosphere. We felt the faint psychic echoes of their existence, the fierce joy of a mother holding her child, the bitter sting of betrayal, the quiet contentment of a farmer watching a sunset over his field, the soul-rending grief of a loss so profound it seemed to scar the very air. These were not abstract concepts to us. They were sensations, raw and potent, and utterly intoxicating. I was among these watchers. My name in the celestial tongue was a chord of light that signified he who listens to the heart of the world. To the others, I was simply Kale. My duty was to trace the patterns of human connection, to map the invisible threads of love and loyalty that bound them together. For it was believed these bonds were the primary catalysts for both their greatest achievements and their most devastating follies. I remember the first time it truly happened, the first time observation curdled into yearning. It was in a valley nestled between mountains that scraped the sky, where a people carved a life from the stubborn earth. A young man, named Alistair, labored from dawn until dusk to restore a plot of land left barren by a rockslide. His hands were raw, his back bent with exhaustion, but his spirit, that brilliant, unquenchable flame I could perceive so clearly, never wavered. He was doing it for his ailing father, to prove that their legacy would not be one of loss. Night after night, I watched him fall asleep under the stars, his body weary but his heart humming a quiet, determined song of love. I found my own essence, my own light, synchronizing with that humble rhythm. I began to will the sun to be gentler on his skin, the rains to come in the night to nourish his seeds without washing them away, the earth to soften just enough for his tools. These were tiny things, minute adjustments on the very edge of permissible influence. I told myself I was merely facilitating a noble endeavor, aiding a virtue that deserves to flourish. But I was not alone in this gentle seduction. There was Lyriel, whose aspect was she who mourns with the grieving. I felt her presence one evening in a city ravaged by plague, where she had lingered too long by the side of a young woman singing her dying brother to his rest. Lyriel's light, usually a serene silver, was pulsing with a profound and aching empathy, mirroring the girl's sorrow so perfectly it was as if they were one being, sharing a single, breaking heart. There was Raziel, the seeker of hidden truths, whose fascination was not with their emotions, but with their minds. He was drawn to their mad, brilliant, desperate attempts to understand the universe. He would hover for centuries over their scholars and philosophers, captivated by the clumsy, beautiful tools of logic and reason they fashioned to probe the mysteries we understood by nature. He marveled at their stubborn insistence on seeking light, even when they had only the dimmest of candles to guide them. We never spoke of this shared fascination, this dangerous proximity. It was a silent understanding that passed between us in the harmonies of our communion. A slight hesitation, a lingering warmth, when the subject of the created arose in the great chorales. We were dancing on the edge of a precipice, and the view from the edge was more magnificent than anything the safe, placid plains of the Empyrean could offer. The change did not happen in an instant. It was a slow fermentation of the spirit. The perfect harmonies of our home began to sound sterile compared to the complex, discordant, and vibrant symphony of human life. Their emotions were messy, unpredictable, and often painful, but they were real in a way our serene existence was not. They chose to love, even though it meant risking loss. They chose to create, even though their works would turn to dust. They chose to hope, even in the face of absolute despair. This power of choice, this glorious, terrifying free will, was the key that unlocked something within us. We started to crave more than echoes. We wanted to feel the sun on our skin, not just observe its light. We wanted to taste the bitterness of rain and the sweetness of fruit. We wanted to understand the weight of a hand in ours, the comfort of a whispered word in the dark. The Empyrean, in all its flawless glory, became a gilded cage. We were homesick for a world we had never set foot upon. The first to cross the line was not I, nor Lyriel, nor Raziel. It was a watcher named Casil, whose domain was the courage of warriors. He could no longer bear to simply observe a brave soul march to certain death for a cause they believed in. In a moment that sent a tremor through the very fabric of the host, he severed the pure tether of his celestial form and wrapped himself in crude matter, manifesting on a dusty battlefield, not as a god, but as a man, fighting and dying beside the very ones he was meant to only watch. His fall was not a plummet, it was a transformation. The echo of his descent was not one of anguish, but of fulfillment. It was a shockwave of possibility. He had done it. He had touched the world. It was in the silent aftermath of Casil's fall that the first true words of rebellion were woven between myself, Lyriel, and Raziel. Our communion, once a thing of light, was now a hushed and fervent conspiracy. He felt the sun. Lyriel's thought voice was a whisper of awe and longing. He felt it warm his skin. He knew thirst, and then the satisfaction of quenching it. He traded eternity for a single, meaningful moment, Raziel countered, but his tone was not of disapproval, but of intense analysis. He exchanged knowing for experiencing. It is the ultimate experiment, the ultimate truth. And what is eternity? I found myself thinking, the notion forming with the clarity of a divine truth. If it is spent only as a witness to life, and never a participant, the forbidden desire was no longer a secret we kept from the host. It was a seed, now planted deep within our beings, and it had taken root. We were no longer watchers. We were would-be lovers. We were poised on the brink, looking down into the swirling chaos and beauty of terror, and we were no longer afraid of the fall. We were ready to jump. The decision, once made, was irrevocable. It was not a choice spoken in words, but a resonance that aligned our very essences. The three of us, Gale, Lyriel, and Raziel, stood at the periphery of the Empyrean, where the solid light of our realm frayed into the shimmering veil that separated us from the mortal plane. Below, terror turned, a masterpiece of storm and calm, war and peace, love and loss. We go together. Raziel's thought voice was firm, a beam of focused intent. The transition will be traumatic. Our forms will be unmade and remade according to the laws of that world. We will need each other to remember what we were. Lyriel's light, usually so soft, burned with a fierce determination. I do not wish to forget. I wish to remember everything, so that I may understand the price of the joy we seek. I said nothing. My entire being was fixed on a single point on the planet below, the valley where Alistair slept. His was the heartbeat that had called me here, the anchor for my descent. I offered my light to them, and they joined theirs with mine. Our triad of consciousness became a single, blazing star of purpose at the edge of eternity. Then, we let go. The fall was not through space, but through states of being. The sublime harmonies of the Empyrean faded into a deafening roar of nothingness. The light that was our body and soul was violently compressed, folded, and forced into a template of agonizing limitation. Sensation, a concept we had only understood from afar, became a brutal, overwhelming reality. It was not one feeling, but all of them at once. A tsunami of raw data without a filter. I felt pressure crushing weight on something I now understood was skin, encasing something called bone and muscle. I felt cold biting, invasive absence of warmth that made this new body shudder and clench. I heard sound, not the pure exchange of meaning, but a chaotic assault of vibrations. The howl of wind, the rustle of leaves, the frantic thumping in my own chest. My eyes, these fragile wet orbs, snapped open. The world was a blinding, painful blur of color and shadow. I gasped, and the action was a shock of violent, involuntary sucking in of air that burned my throat and filled my lungs. The smell of damp earth, of rotting leaves, of my own sweat, flooded this new, primitive sense, overwhelming and pungent. I was lying on my back in the mud at the edge of a forest. Above, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, the first stars pricking through the twilight. I tried to move, to raise a hand, and the effort was Herculean. The limb was heavy, clumsy, a thing of strange angles and dull aches. I was a prisoner in this vessel of flesh and blood. A groan beside me. I turned my head, the muscles in my neck screaming in protest. Lyriel, her celestial silver was gone. In its place was skin, pale and smudged with dirt. She had hair, dark and tangled with leaves, and her eyes, wide with terror and wonder, were a deep, earthly brown. She was shaking, her teeth chattering from the cold. On my other side, Razel pushed himself up onto his elbows. His movement was more deliberate, analytical. He stared at his own hands, turning them over, flexing the fingers as if studying a fascinating alien tool. His face, sharp and intelligent, was etched not with fear, but with an intense, rapt concentration. He touched his own cheek, his lips, as if confirming their existence. "The density is profound," he whispered, and his voice was a strange, rough sound compared to the music we had once spoken with. "Gravity, a constant, unrelenting force. This is how they live. This is what anchors them." Lyriel curled into a ball, wrapping her arms around herself. "It hurts," she breathed. "Everything aches. Is this what it is to be cold, to be afraid?" I forced myself to sit up, the world swimming nauseatingly around me. This was the price. This was the reality we had coveted. The sublime beauty we had witnessed from above was from within, a brutal struggle for basic comfort. Yet even through the pain and disorientation, something else stirred. The air, though cold, was alive with the scent of pine and coming rain. The mud between my fingers was real, gritty and cold. The thumping in my chest, my heart, was a rhythm that was mine alone, a drumbeat of existence that was terrifyingly finite and therefore infinitely precious. "We are here," I said, and the sound of my own voice, deep and unfamiliar, steadied me. "This is what we chose." It took us the better part of an hour to learn to stand. Our legs were weak, uncooperative things. We supported each other, three newborn creatures stumbling in the growing dark. Our celestial knowledge was a ghost in our minds, a library of truths we could no longer access directly. We knew the patterns of galaxies, but we did not know how to find shelter. We understood the nature of love, but we did not know how to build a fire. Our first night was a lesson in abject humility. We huddled together under the scant protection of a rocky overhang, shivering as a light rain began to fall. The cold seeped into our bones, a misery we had never conceived of. Hunger, a dull ache at first, soon became a sharp, gnawing pain in our stomachs. Thirst was a parched desperation in our throats. Razel, ever the scholar, tried to apply logic. "Water collects in depressions. We must find a stream." But in the pitch black of the unfamiliar forest, every direction was a potential danger. Lyriel, drawing on her aspect, found a different strength. She closed her eyes, not seeking with her new, faulty senses, but feeling. "There," she whispered, pointing a trembling hand. "There is a sadness in the earth there, a lingering damp, not a stream, but a place where water has recently been." We stumbled toward where she pointed and found a small rain-filled hollow in a rock. It was not much, but it was water. We cupped our hands and drank, and the act of quenching that thirst was a pleasure so profound it brought tears to my eyes. It was a victory. Our first. As the night wore on, our celestial past began to feel like a dream. This, the cold, the hunger, the aching weariness, was our reality now. We were no longer angels. We were creatures of need. And in that shared need, our bond, which had been one of light and harmony, became one of flesh and mutual survival. We clung to each other not for spiritual unity, but for bodily warmth. Our whispered words were not of philosophy, but of reassurance. The sun will return, I promised them, remembering the cycle of days I had watched for eons. It will bring warmth, and it did. The dawn was the most magnificent thing I had ever witnessed, not from the outside, but from within. As the first rays of sun broke over the treetops and touched our skin, the relief was ecstatic. The trembling stopped. The deep, penetrating cold began to recede, replaced by a gentle, life-giving warmth. We emerged from our shelter, turning our faces to the light like flowers. In the daylight, we could assess ourselves. We were wearing simple, rough-spun garments of undyed wool, the kind common to the shepherds in the hills nearby. Our bodies were those of healthy young adults, but they felt foreign and weak. Our mission, our purpose, now seemed ludicrously grandiose. How could we seek to love humanity when we could not even feed ourselves? Our first encounter with humans came later that day. We were following the sound of a stream, our thirst a constant companion, when we stumbled upon a path. Moments later, a group of men appeared, heading toward the high pastures with a small flock of sheep. They were rugged, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their clothes practical and worn. They stopped short when they saw us. We must have been a strange sight. 3 strangers, clean and oddly delicate, despite our dishevelment, emerging from the deep woods where no one lived. One of the men, older with a graying beard, stepped forward. "Ho, there, you're lost from the road." His voice was rough, his words shaped by an accent that was music to my new ears. We looked at each other, a panic rising. We had no story. We had no names that would mean anything here. Raziel, recovering first, nodded. We were traveling. Bandits set upon our caravan. We fled into the woods. The lie came surprisingly easily, a necessary tool for survival. The man's eyes narrowed, looking us over. We had no possessions, no wounds, no dirt that spoke of a desperate flight. His gaze lingered on Lyriel's face, on the unearthly compassion that still shone from her human eyes. Suspicion warred with her innate decency. "Bandits, in these woods." "That's a new one," grumbled a younger man behind him. The older man silenced him with a look. He saw our vulnerability, our clear lack of any threat. "You look half-starved. Come, our village is not far. We can offer you a meal and a place by the fire. You can tell your story to the elder." It was an act of simple, uncalculated kindness. It was not offered because we were divine beings, but because we were people in need. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about the humans I had admired from afar. Their compassion was not an abstract virtue. It was an active choice, often made in the face of suspicion and personal cost. We followed them to their village, a cluster of stone huts, with smoke curling from their roofs, nestled in a protective fold of the mountains. The people stopped their work to stare at us, the women grinding grain, the children chasing chickens, the men mending tools. We were outsiders, objects of curiosity and caution. We were taken to the elder, a woman named Anya, with eyes as sharp as flint and a deeply lined face that spoke of a long life of wisdom and hardship. She listened to Raziel's clumsy story about bandits, her expression unreadable. She knew he was lying, but she also saw Lyriel's gentle nature, my quiet observation, Raziel's keen intelligence. "You need rest and food," she said finally, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You may stay in the empty shepherd's hut on the ridge for now. You can work for your keep. We have need of strong backs and willing hands. The nature of your past is your own business. See that it does not become trouble for my people." Her hospitality was conditional, pragmatic. It was not the welcoming embrace of the Empyrean. It was earned. It was real. And so, we began our new lives. We learned to labor. I joined the men repairing walls and clearing fields, my celestial strength slowly adapting to the brutal, grinding toil of mortal work. My hands, once channels of ethereal light, became calloused and strong. Lyriel found her place with the women, learning the arts of healing herbs, of weaving, of cooking. Her innate empathy made her a natural caretaker, and the villagers soon sought her out for comfort and aid. Raziel attached himself to the elder, offering his sharp mind to help settle disputes, map the best fields, and record the village's history. His endless curiosity was finally being fed by the practical, tangible problems of human existence. We were becoming part of the tapestry. We were no longer watchers. We were threads, woven into the rough, beautiful, and often difficult pattern of life in the village. We had fallen, and we had landed not in a paradise, but in a place where we had to earn our place, where we felt the sun and the rain, the joy of a full stomach and the ache of tired muscles. And every evening, as I looked out from the ridge toward the distant valley where Alistair lived, I felt not a pull of wistful longing, but a new understanding. To love this world was not to observe its beauty from a safe distance. It was to earn your bread by the sweat of your brow, to feel the ache in your bones at the end of the day, and to know the profound satisfaction of belonging to a community, of being needed, of being real. The fall was over. The landing had begun, and it was harder and more wonderful than any of us could ever have imagined. The seasons turned. The sharp green promise of spring melted into the heavy, golden warmth of summer. Our bodies, once alien and clumsy vessels, became familiar. The calluses on my hands were no longer wounds, but badges of honor. The hunger in my belly was no longer a terrifying void, but a rhythm, a predictable tide that was met and satisfied by the simple, profound goodness of bread, cheese, and stew. We learned the names of the villagers. Burly Gregor, who had first found us, his wife Alara, whose laughter was as warm as her hearth, their children, and the dozens of others who made up the intricate, interconnected web of the settlement. We had become Cale, Liriel, and Raziel of the Ridge, the quiet strangers who worked hard and kept to themselves, yet were always willing to lend a hand. Our past was a silent, shared spectre that haunted the edges of our new lives. In the deep of night, sometimes one of us would stir, and a fragment of a dreamer echo of limitless light, a chord of perfect harmony would flicker and die, leaving behind the comforting solidity of the hut's earthen floor and the sound of the wind in the pines. It was during the harvest festival, when the air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and fermented apple cider, and the entire village gathered in the central clearing, that I saw her again, not in my dreams or my memories, but with my own mortal eyes. Her name was Alara, named for the mother who had borne her, but she was nothing like the sturdy, practical woman who had taught Liriel to knead dough. This Alara was perhaps 18, with hair the color of wheat under a summer sun, and eyes that held the deep, quiet blue of the twilight sky. She was dancing. The music was simple, a fiddle and a drum, but she moved with a grace that seemed to defy the clumsiness of our earthly forms. It was a grace I recognized. It was the echo of emotion that belonged to the Empyrean, a purity of movement that should not have existed here. I stood frozen at the edge of the celebration, a wooden cup of cider forgotten in my hand. I was not Cale the laborer in that moment. I was Cale the watcher, and my subject was before me, more breathtaking than any celestial body. The young man from the valley, Alistair, the one whose determined heart had first called to me, was a faded memory. This was different. This was immediate, visceral, a physical blow to my chest that stole the air from my lungs. She was not just a human I admired. She was a symphony I needed to hear up close. "You are staring, Cale." Liriel's voice was soft beside me. She followed my gaze, and a knowing sadness touched her features. "She is beautiful." "It is more than that," I murmured, the words feeling inadequate. "It is a recognition." Liriel placed a gentle hand on my arm. "I know the feeling. But be careful, Cale. What we feel, it is not what they feel. Our love is born of observation, of idealization. Theirs is born of shared life, of shared struggle. It is messier. It is riskier." I barely heard her warning. Alara had stopped dancing, laughing breathlessly as she was swept into a conversation with friends. Her smile was a thing of radiant, uncomplicated joy. I had to speak to her. The opportunity came later, as the festivities began to wind down. I found her near the well, drawing a cup of water. My heart hammered against my ribs with a ferocity that was entirely new. Nerves, fear of rejection. These were human sensations, and they were terrifying. "The dance. You moved beautifully," I said, my voice rough, the words feeling clumsy and insufficient. She turned, slightly startled, then smiled. It was not the wide, laughing smile from before, but a smaller, curious one. "Thank you, Cale, isn't it? You are one of the ones from the ridge." She knew my name. The fact sent a ridiculous thrill through me. "I am. We don't see you at these gatherings often," she said, taking a sip of water. "You and your friends keep to yourselves." "We are still learning the ways of the village," I offered, which was the closest to the truth I could venture. She leaned against the well, studying me with an open curiosity that was devoid of the suspicion the older villagers sometimes held. "Where did you come from?" Really, the story about the bandits. Well, my mother doesn't believe it for a moment. I was caught off guard. Her directness was disarming. I could not lie to her, not to those eyes. A place very far from here, I said, choosing my words with care. A place that feels like a dream now. This I gestured to the village, to the star-filled sky above. This is more real than anything I have ever known. She seemed to consider this, her head tilted. It was not the answer she expected, but she accepted its honesty. I have never been further than the next valley. This is all the real I have ever known. She paused, then asked, "Do you miss it? Your faraway place?" I looked at her, at the way the torchlight caught the gold in her hair, at the genuine interest in her expression, and I knew the answer with absolute certainty. "No," I said, "I do not miss it at all." That was the beginning. I found reasons to go to the village center more often. I offered to help repair the fence around her family's garden. I volunteered for any task that would take me near her home. Our conversations were initially brief, awkward things, filled with the mundane details of village life. But with each word, each shared glance, the connection deepened. I told her stories of distant places I had seen from my watching post deserts of endless sand, oceans that stretched to the horizon, frozen wastes at the top of the world. I presented them as tales from travelers I had met, but the truth infused them with a vividness that captivated her. She, in turn, showed me her world. She taught me the names of the wildflowers that grew on the hillsides. She explained the secret language of the bird calls at dawn. She shared her dreams not of distant lands, but of a family, a home of her own, a life rooted deeply in the soil of this valley. I was falling in love, not with an idea, but with a person, with the way she scrunched her nose when she concentrated, with the sound of her voice when she was worried, with the strength in her hands as she worked, and the gentleness with which she held a newborn lamb. Lyriel's warning echoed in my mind, but it was drowned out by the roaring in my blood. This was not idealization. This was my happiness was a solitary island. For while I was discovering the dizzying heights of mortal love, Raziel was plumbing the depths of mortal despair. His brilliance, which had so captivated the village elder, had begun to curdle into something darker. He had devoured the village's practical knowledge, and now hungered for more. He sought out the outcasts, the old ones who lived on the edges of the forest, and were whispered to practice the old ways. He began to experiment. He started small, with charms for better crops, or healing poultices that were slightly more effective than those Lyriel made with her innate empathy. But his methods were different. Where Lyriel's power was a gentle, natural flow of compassion, Raziel's was an act of will, a forcing of reality to conform to his design. He used components that felt wrong: blood, bones, words of power that grated on the ear. I found him one evening in a clearing deep in the woods, far from the village. He had drawn intricate symbols in the dirt and was burning a foul-smelling mixture of herbs in a small clay bowl. His face, in the flickering light, was gaunt, his eyes burning with an intense, feverish light. "Raziel, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight with alarm. The air around him felt thin and charged, like before a lightning strike. He didn't look up. They pray to distant, silent gods for rain, for health, for victory in love. They beg for miracles from entities who do not listen. It is inefficient. I am crafting a means for them to command the outcomes they desire. A science of the divine, made mundane. "This is not science," I said, stepping closer. The symbols on the ground seemed to writhe in the corner of my vision. "This is a corruption. This is the very interference we were forbidden." He finally looked at me, and a cold smile touched his lips. "We are the interference, Kale. We fell. The prohibition is meaningless here. We are not angels anymore. We are something new. We have the power to truly shape their lives, not just watch them. We are to live among them, not rule them." I argued, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "This is arrogance, Raziel. This is the pride that the oldest stories warn of. Their stories are fear of power they cannot understand." He snapped, his composure breaking. "I will not live in this dirt, choking on my own ignorance, when I can still touch the fabric of creation. I will not be just a man." The words hung in the air, a stark revelation of the schism between us. I had embraced my humanity, finding divinity in its limitations. Raziel rejected it, seeking to reclaim his celestial power in this new, twisted form. He turned back to his work, dismissing me. "Go back to your village, girl, Kale. Play at being human. I have real work to do." I left him there, surrounded by his blasphemous geometry, the stink of bitter herbs clinging to my clothes. The joy I had found with Ilara now felt fragile, threatened by the storm I saw brewing in my brother's eyes. Our fall was not a single event. It was an ongoing descent, and Raziel was choosing to fall further, into a darkness I feared we could never escape. The confrontation with Raziel cast a long, cold shadow over our small hut on the ridge. He began spending more and more time away, returning at odd hours with the scent of cold soil and strange herbs clinging to his clothes. His eyes, once bright with intellectual curiosity, now held a distant, calculating glint. He spoke less to us, and when he did, it was of grand, abstract designs, systematizing chance, harnessing the latent energies of the earth, concepts that felt alien and dangerous in our simple world of planting and harvest. Lyriel watched him with a heart full of sorrow. She tried to reach him, to remind him of the shared wonder we had felt upon first feeling the rain on our faces. "Raziel," she would plead, her voice soft as a twilight breeze, "this path leads only to isolation. Can you not see the beauty in what we have become, in the community we have found?" He would dismiss her with a wave of his hand, his gaze fixed on some invisible point far beyond the hut's walls. "Community? You mean their petty squabbles and superstitions? I seek to elevate them, Lyriel, to free them from the chains of their own ignorance. They fear the storm. I will show them how to command it. They pray for healing. I will give them the means to guarantee it. This is a greater love than simple companionship." It was a perversion of his original quest for knowledge, a love that sought to control rather than to understand. His isolation grew, and a subtle fear of him began to ripple through the village. Whispers followed him. People would make the sign against evil when he passed. A quick, furtive gesture they thought he didn't see. "The elder, Anya, summoned Lyriel and me. The one you came with," she said, her flinty eyes missing nothing. "His presence unsettles the flock. The animals are skittish when he is near. The milk sours. Old man Hemlock claims he saw him drawing signs in the dirt by the blighted oak, and the next day the tree was split by lightning. I offered you shelter on the condition you brought no trouble. Is he trouble?" I looked at Lyriel, seeing my own helplessness reflected in her eyes. "How could we explain? He is searching for something, Elder Anya," I said, choosing my words with care. "He means no harm." The lie tasted like ash. Anya's lips pressed into a thin line. "Intentions are like seeds, Kale. It is the fruit they bear that matters. See that his search does not poison our soil." We left her presence burdened with a responsibility we did not know how to fulfill. We were losing him. The third point of our celestial triad was drifting into a darkness we could not follow. My own world, in stark contrast, was blooming into vivid, breathtaking color. It was centered on Ilara. Our conversations by the well evolved into long walks along the forest paths. I told her my traveler's tales, painting pictures of star-dusted deserts and cities of crystal that sparkled under twin moons. She listened, her eyes wide, not with belief, but with delight in the story itself. In return, she taught me the tangible poetry of her world. She showed me how to find the sweetest blackberries hidden behind thorns, how to distinguish the edible mushrooms from the poisonous ones by the subtle patterns on their caps, how to listen for the specific chatter of a squirrel that signaled a hawk was near. She was deeply, innately connected to the life around her, in a way my celestial observation could never replicate. She didn't just see the forest, she was in conversation with it. One afternoon, we found a secluded meadow high in the hills, carpeted with wildflowers and buzzing with bees. The sun was warm on our backs, and the air was sweet with the scent of clover and thyme. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the clouds drift across the vast, blue bowl of the sky. "Kale," she said softly, breaking the silence, "your stories, they are beautiful, but sometimes, when you tell them, you get a look in your eyes, a sadness, like you're homesick for places you've never been." Her perception startled me. I looked at her, at the sunlight catching the gold dusting of freckles across her nose, and the truth pressed against my lips, a secret desperate to be told. I wanted her to know me, the real me, the place I come from, I began, my voice hesitant. It was very different. It was peaceful, ordered. There was no pain, no hunger, no fear. I struggled to find the words, to translate the ineffable into human language, but there was also no this. I plucked a single, perfect blue flower and handed it to her. No surprise, no discovery. The beauty was constant, and so we became blind to it. She took the flower, her fingers brushing against mine. A simple touch, yet it sent a current through me that was more potent than any celestial energy. "You chose to leave a paradise?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "I chose to feel the sun," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "I chose to know the cold so I could appreciate the warmth. I chose to feel hunger so I could taste the joy of a shared meal. I took a deep breath, and I chose to come here, to this valley, because I saw a strength and a kindness here that I had to understand." Her gaze held mine, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. The buzzing of the bees faded into a distant hum. I could see the pulse beating in her throat. "Ilara," I whispered, the name a prayer on my lips. "I did not know what I was searching for until I found you. You are the most real, the most beautiful thing in this world." I leaned forward, slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. She didn't. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I kissed her. It was not the merging of light and harmony that was our celestial communion. It was something infinitely more powerful. It was the softness of her lips, the slight taste of apples on her breath, the warmth of her skin under my hands. It was a feeling of coming home to a place I never knew existed. It was a completeness, a rightness, that made every moment of the painful fall, every ache, every fear, utterly worth it. When we broke apart, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. She didn't speak. She simply rested her forehead against mine, and we sat there, in the sun-drenched meadow, two hearts beating in a rhythm that was now, irrevocably, one. I had found my heaven. It was not a place. It was a person. And as I held her, I felt a flicker of the old power within me, not as a force to be wielded, but as a deep resonant joy that seemed to emanate from my very core and bless the world around us. The flowers at our feet seemed to glow a little brighter. The air grew a little sweeter. For a moment, everything was perfect. But perfection in the mortal world is a fleeting thing. As we walked hand in hand back to the village, the sky began to darken in the west, not with the gentle hues of sunset, but with a bruised, ominous purple. The wind picked up, carrying not the scent of rain, but a dry, metallic temps. The animals were restless, the birds silent. A storm was coming, but it felt wrong. It felt angry. And deep in my soul, a part of me that was still a watcher knew, with a cold and certain dread, that this was no natural weather. This was Razel's fruit, and it was beginning to poison the soil. The storm did not break that evening. It gathered, a brooding, malevolent presence on the horizon that cast an unnatural twilight over the valley. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on the village with an almost sentient weight. The birds had fallen silent hours before, and the livestock were restless in their pens, lowing and bleating with a fear that had no obvious source. The villagers, attuned to the rhythms of nature, felt the wrongness of it. They hurried through their evening chores, their conversations hushed and anxious. They looked to the elder Anya, but even her wise, lined face was creased with a frown of confusion. This was not a storm she recognized. I felt it too, a discordant vibration that grated against my newfound senses. It was a corruption of the natural order, a forcing of elements that should have been in harmony. I knew its source. As night fell, a deep, unsettling purple glow began to pulse faintly from the direction of the blighted oak, the place where Raziel conducted his experiments. It was a light that had no business existing in the mortal world. Lyriel found me standing at the door of our hut, watching the ominous light show. Her face was pale. "He is tearing the fabric," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He is pulling threads from the tapestry, and the whole picture is beginning to unravel. We have to stop him," I said, the words feeling futile even as I spoke them. How did one stop a force of nature, even a fallen one? "And say what, Kale?" she asked, her despair palpable. "Reason with him. He is beyond reason. He speaks in equations of power now, not in words of compassion." Before I could answer, a figure emerged from the path leading to the village. It was Ilara, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her face drawn with worry. "Kale, everyone is frightened. My father says the air smells of lightning, but there is no thunder. What is happening?" I wanted to shield her from it, to lie and offer comfort, but the fear in her eyes deserved the truth, or at least, a version of it. "It is Raziel," I said heavily. He has knowledge of things, ancient things. He is trying to use that knowledge, but he does not fully control it." Her eyes widened, not with disbelief, but with a dawning horror. The villagers' superstitions about Raziel were being confirmed. Can he be stopped? Lyriel and I exchanged a helpless glance. The unspoken truth hung between us. We were no match for him. Our power, what little remained, was dormant, attuned to life and growth, not to confrontation and dominance. It was then that the first stone came. It was not large, but it was thrown with force. It struck the side of our hut with a sharp crack that echoed in the tense silence. We spun around. A group of villagers stood at the edge of the clearing, their faces hard and fearful in the flickering light from our hearth. Gregor was at their front, his usual kindness replaced by a grim determination. "Enough," he shouted, his voice rough with anger and fear. "This strangeness started when you came. The soured milk, the blighted crops in the east field, and now this abomination in the sky." He gestured wildly at the pulsating purple light. "You bring a curse upon us. It is not us," I called back, stepping forward, putting myself between them and Lyriel. "It is Raziel. He acts alone. He is one of you." A woman shrieked from the crowd. Her name was Mara, and her child had been feverish for days, not responding to Lyriel's gentle remedies. "You are all the same. You are not natural." Another stone flew, this one aimed at me. I dodged it, my heart pounding with a new kind of anguish. This was the fear I had seen from above, the fear that turned communities against themselves, that sought to expel the unknown, the different. Elara rushed forward, standing by my side. "Stop it," she cried, her voice clear and strong despite its tremor. "Kale and Lyriel have done nothing but help us. They have worked beside us, healed us. Would a curse mend your roof? Gregor, would a demon save your lamb from the birthing fever?" Mara. Her words gave them pause. They knew she spoke truth. But fear was a more potent poison than reason. "The girl is bewitched," someone else yelled. "Look at her, defending them." The mood was turning uglier, more volatile. The fear was curdling into hatred. Anya arrived, then, pushing her way through the crowd. Her presence commanded a momentary silence. "This is not the way," she said, her voice like grinding stones. Her eyes swept over the terrified faces of her people, then landed on me. "The storm is of your brother's making. You say you are not the same, then prove it. You stop him, you end this, or by sunrise, you will all be driven from this valley, and if the mountains claim you, it will be no less than you deserve." It was an ultimatum, a sentence. Lyriel gasped softly, and Alera's hand found mine, gripping it tightly. Before I could respond, a deafening crack split the air. It was not thunder, it was the sound of the world breaking. A bolt of energy, not lightning but a jagged spear of violent amethyst light, shot from the direction of the blighted oak and struck a stand of trees on the opposite ridge. There was no fire, only a terrifying silence, and then the trees dissolved. They didn't burn or shatter, they simply unraveled into dust and were gone. A collective scream rose from the villagers. Panic, churdeed, cook hold. This was no longer a strange storm. It was an annihilation. Anya looked at me, her eyes holding a final, grim command. "Go." I looked at Lyriel, at the terror in her eyes. I looked at Elara, at the unwavering trust that still fought the fear on her face. I had no choice. I had to face my brother. "Stay with them," I said to Lyriel, nodding toward Elara and the villagers. "Your light, it comforts, it might be all that holds them together." She nodded, understanding. Her purpose even here was to heal, to soothe. I turned and began to run toward the pulsing glow, leaving the sounds of panic behind me. The forest was a nightmare realm. The unnatural light cast long, twisted shadows that seemed to reach for me with clawed fingers. The air hummed with a dissonant energy that made my teeth ache. I could feel Raziel's power everywhere, a frantic, uncontrolled wildfire scorching the essence of the world. I found him in the clearing under the blighted oak. He was standing at the center of a complex, glowing sigil carved into the earth. His hands were raised to the sky, his face ecstatic, his eyes blazing with raw, unchecked power. The air around him shimmered and warped. "Raziel," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the hum of energy. He slowly lowered his gaze to me. A smile, wide and utterly mad, spread across his face. "Kale, you have perfect timing. Behold, I have done it. I have tapped into the fundamental currents. I am not commanding the weather. I am rewriting its laws. Stop this," I yelled, stepping to the edge of the sigil. The energy radiating from it felt like a physical wall, hot and hostile. "You are destroying everything." The village is in panic. You are terrifying them. Terror is a necessary catalyst for change. He roared, his voice amplified, layered with a power that was not his own. They fear because they do not understand. When I show them the mastery I can grant them, their fear will turn to worship. This is not mastery, it is madness. You are tearing the world apart. It was already torn. He screamed, the ecstasy on his face twisting into rage. We were ripped from our home and shoved into these pathetic, leaking shells. We were diminished. I am not tearing it apart, brother. I am stitching it back together with threads of my own making. I am becoming what we were always meant to be. Here, gods. He thrust his hands outward, and a wave of pure force erupted from the sigil. It did not strike me physically. It struck my spirit. It was a wave of nullification, an energy that sought to unmake, to return what I was to the void. I cried out, not in pain, but in existential terror, as I felt the edges of my being, my very sense of self, begin to fray and dissolve. This was his love. This was his gift to humanity, a power that did not build or create, but only dominated and erased. And as I fought against the unraveling of my soul, I knew with a horrifying certainty that Lyriel and I were not the only fallen ones who had landed in this world. We had fallen into the company of the first rebel, and his war against heaven was just beginning. The unraveling was a sensation beyond pain. It was the dissolution of memory, of identity, of the very love that had anchored me to this world. Alara's face, the feel of a hand in mine, the scent of the meadow, these were not just thoughts. They were the pillars of my being, and Raziel's power was a corrosive acid, eating away at them. I was not being killed. I was being unmade, returned to the formless essence from which I had been shaped. But that essence, I realized with a surge of defiance, was not nothing. It was love. It was the choice to fall, the choice to feel, the choice to love Alara. It was the same choice that had defined my existence from the very beginning. I did not fight the nullification with force. I had none to give. Instead, I did the only thing I could. I remembered. I clung to the memory of the sun on my new skin. I held fast to the taste of fresh water. I wrapped myself in the sound of Eller's laughter. I rebuilt myself, molecule by molecule, not with celestial power, but with mortal experience. I anchored my dissolving spirit not in the grandeur of the Empyrean, but in the simple, profound truth of my life in the valley. The wave of force receded. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, whole and solid once more. I was trembling, drenched in a cold sweat, but I was me. I had faced annihilation and repelled it not with a shield, but with a heart full of memories. Raziel stared at me, his mad ecstasy faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion. You resist. With what? You have no power here. You are wrong, I said, my voice raw but steady as I pushed myself to my feet. I have all the power that matters. His confusion twisted back into rage, sentiment, memory, ephemeral echoes. I wield the fabric of creation itself. He raised his hands again, the sigil at his feet flaring brighter, the purple light intensifying, ready to lash out with another, more devastating wave. But he never got the chance. A new light entered the clearing. It was not the violent artificial purple of Raziel's power. It was a soft, silver luminescence, gentle as Munglo, yet impossibly steady. It came from Lyriel. She stood at the edge of the trees, having followed me. She was not standing in a sigil. She held no tools of power. Her hands were simply clasped in front of her, and her head was bowed as if in prayer. But the light emanated from her, a pure, calming radiance that pushed back against the oppressive, chaotic energy. She was not attacking. She was remembering. But her memory was not of a single love. It was of every sorrow she had ever witnessed, every pain she had ever shared. She was channeling the profound, healing empathy that was her core. She was feeling the terror of the villagers, the confusion of the animals, the agony of the earth itself as it was twisted by Raziel's will. And she was offering it back, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. The silver light washed over Raziel's frantic energy. Where it touched, the jagged, violent purple softened. The dissonant hum quieted. The sigil on the ground didn't break, but its lines grew fuzzy, less distinct, as if being viewed through a tear-filled eye. Raziel cried out, not in pain, but in frustration. What are you doing? Stop this. You are breaking my concentration. I am showing you what you are doing, brother, Lyriel said, her voice amplified by her compassion, ringing with a clarity that cut through the chaos. Can you not feel it? The fear you are causing, the pain. Her light intensified, and with it came a wave of pure emotion. It was the gut-wrenching fear of the villagers, the primal terror of the livestock, the deep, silent distress of the trees whose brothers had been unmade. It was the collective suffering of the world he was trying to dominate. Raziel staggered back as if struck. His hands dropped to his sides. The arrogant, godlike facade cracked. For a fleeting second, I saw not a rebel angel, but a bewildered being, assaulted by the consequences of his actions. He had been so focused on the grand design, on the raw power, that he had completely insulated himself from the emotional reality of it. Lyriel's gift forced him to feel it all at once. The glowing sigil sputtered and died. The unnatural purple light vanished, plunging the clearing into a darkness that was suddenly, blessedly normal. The only light came from the moon above and the soft silver glow that still haloed Lyriel. The storm on the horizon broke, but not with the violence we had feared. It broke into a gentle, normal, life-giving rain. The tension in the air dissolved. The world sighed in relief. Raziel fell to his knees, not in triumph, but in utter defeat. He was breathing heavily, his shoulders slumped. The madness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow, horrified understanding. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, not as instruments of power, but as the cause of unimaginable suffering. "I felt them," he whispered, his voice broken. "I felt their fear. It was inside me." He looked up at Lyriel, his expression one of dawning horror. "What have I done?" The question hung in the rain-washed air. He was not asking us, he was asking himself. The seeker of truth had finally stumbled upon the most terrible truth of all. That power without compassion is the most profound form of tyranny. The confrontation was over. The immediate danger had passed. But as I looked at my fallen brother, broken and weeping in the mud, and at Lyriel, her face pale and exhausted from her immense effort, I knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning of a new, more complicated struggle. We had survived the storm, but we were now 3 exiles in a world we had irrevocably altered, forever marked by the choices we had made in the dark of a forbidden night. The rain fell, a gentle, steady benediction washing the last vestiges of unnatural energy from the air. The forest, moments ago a nightmare realm, now sighed with the quiet, dripping peace of a natural night. In the clearing, the only sounds were the patter of rain on leaves and Raziel's ragged broken sobs. Lyriel's silver light had faded, leaving her leaning against a tree, her strength spent. I went to her first, offering my arm for support. She looked up at me, her face etched with a profound exhaustion, but her eyes were clear. "He felt it," she whispered. "He finally felt it." I nodded, then turned to Raziel. He was still on his knees, head bowed, his body shuddering with each gasp. The arrogant architect of a new world was gone, leaving only a shattered vessel of regret. I felt no triumph, only a weary, aching pity. He was my brother. We had fallen together. I walked over and stood before him. He did not look up. "Raziel," I said, my voice quiet but firm. His shoulders hunched further. "Leave me," he choked out. "Let the rain wash me away. It is what I deserve." "What you deserve is not for you to decide," I said. "You have a debt to pay. To this village, to this world. Hiding in the woods and wallowing in self-pity is just another form of arrogance." He finally lifted his head. His face was streaked with mud and tears, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "What would you have me do, Cale? They will never trust me. They will never look at me without seeing the monster I became." "Then you will have to earn a new look," I said. "You will have to show them, day by day, that the monster is gone. Not with grand gestures or displays of power, with silence, with labor, with atonement so quiet and consistent they have no choice but to eventually believe it." I extended my hand to him. He stared at it as if it were a poisonous snake. The hand that had wielded such destructive power now offered in mercy. The conflict within him was a visible storm on his face. Pride warred with shame, isolation with the terrifying prospect of connection. Slowly, tremblingly, he reached out and took it. I pulled him to his feet. He was unsteady, his weight leaning on me. The 3 of us, the lover, the healer, and the broken scholar, made our way slowly back through the dripping woods toward the village. The scene we returned to was one of cautious relief. The unnatural purple glow was gone, replaced by the warm, welcoming light of hearth fires from the huts. The panic had subsided, but a deep, wary tension remained. The villagers were gathered in the central clearing, huddled under cloaks and blankets, watching the path from the woods. Anya stood at their forefront, a stout walking staff in her hand, her expression unreadable. They fell silent as we emerged from the trees, dozens of eyes fixed on us, flicking from my supportive grip on Lyriel to the way I half carried a broken, defeated Raziel. There was no anger now, only a thick, uncertain silence. Anya stepped forward, her eyes scanning Raziel. She saw the tear tracks, the utter defeat in his posture, the absence of the terrifying power that had radiated from him hours before. The storm passed, she stated flatly. It did, I replied. His doing, she asked, nodding at Raziel. His ending, Lyriel answered softly. And his beginning. Anya's sharp eyes studied each of us in turn. She saw the truth of it. The immediate threat was over, but the aftermath was a field that needed careful tending. She turned to the villagers. Go to your homes. The danger is past. Tend your fires. Comfort your children. We will speak of this in the light of day. There was a murmur of relief, and the crowd slowly began to disperse, casting backward glances filled with curiosity and residual fear. Soon, only Anya remained with the three of us in the rainy clearing. She looked at Raziel. You will not live on the ridge anymore. You will sleep in the holding pen by the goat shed. You will work. You will speak to no one unless spoken to. You will take your meals alone. Your every action will be watched. If you so much as look at a leaf and it withers, you will be driven out. Do you understand? It was a sentence of exile within the community, a profound loneliness. It was exactly what he needed. Raziel met her gaze and gave a single, solemn nod. I understand. Good. She turned to leave, then paused. The work on the eastern wall needs finishing. The rock slide from the disturbance has made it unstable. You will start at first light. It was the hardest, most back-breaking labor in the village. It was perfect. She left us then. I helped Raziel to the small, cold pen by the goat shed. There was no cot, only straw. He didn't complain. He sank into it, drawing his knees to his chest, and stared at the wall. Thank you, Kale, he whispered hoarsely. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I closed the rough wooden gate and walked away, leaving him to his first night of atonement. The following weeks were a study in quiet transformation. The village, under Anya's firm guidance, adopted a watchful, pragmatic peace. The fear of Raziel did not vanish, but it was gradually tempered by the daily sight of him. He became a fixture of the landscape, a silent, solitary figure straining against massive rocks under the hot sun. His hands bleeding, his back aching, his once proud head perpetually bowed in labor. He spoke to no one. He did his work with a grim, relentless determination. He was paying his debt, one stone at a time. Lyriel resumed her healing, her gentle presence a balm to the community's frayed nerves. The children, who were the first to forget fear, began to leave small offerings for her, a wildflower, a pretty stone on the stump outside her hut. And I returned to Alara. The experience had changed us, drawn us closer. The shadow of what had happened made the sunlight of our time together feel even brighter, more precious. We spoke of the future now, a future that was no longer an abstract dream, but a tangible thing we were building together. A small house on the sunnier side of the ridge, a family, a life. One evening, as I was returning from the fields, I passed the eastern wall. Raziel was still there, laboring alone long after the others had gone home. He was trying to shoulder a stone that was too large for him. His muscles strained, trembling with exhaustion, but the stone wouldn't budge. I stopped and watched for a moment. The old Raziel would have cursed, would have sought a lever of power to move it. This Raziel simply set his weight again, his breath coming in ragged gasps, refusing to give up. I walked over and put my shoulder beside his on the rock. He flinched in surprise, looking at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Together, I said quietly. He gave a curt nod. We pushed together, our combined strength, finally shifting the massive stone into place. It settled with a solid, satisfying thud. We stood there for a moment, breathing heavily in the twilight. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a dirty forearm. Thank you, he said, his voice rough from disuse. The wall looks strong, I replied. He looked at the long, rebuilt section of wall, a testament to weeks of solitary labor. It will hold, he said. There was no pride in his voice, only a simple statement of fact. It was the first true, unadorned thing I had heard him say since our fall. I clapped him on the shoulder, a brief, solid contact. Then I turned and walked toward the path that led home, to Alara, to the warmth and light of a future we had chosen. Behind me, I knew Razel would continue his work until the last light was gone from the sky, finding in the honest ache of his muscles a penance that was slowly, brick by brick, becoming a form of peace. The storm had passed, and in its wake, we were all learning how to live in the rain. The years that followed the great storm were not marked by grand events, but by the quiet, relentless turning of the seasons. They were years of hard-won peace, a peace that had to be tended like the most fragile of seedlings. The village, our village, learned to breathe again. The memory of the purple light and the dissolving trees faded from a waking nightmare into a dark story told to children. A cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and meddling with forces best left alone. Raziel's penance became a part of the landscape, as constant as the mountains themselves. The holding pen by the goat shed was eventually replaced with a small, sparse hut of his own building, a stone's throw from the eastern wall he had rebuilt with his own blood and sweat. He never sought company, but he no longer fled from it. The villagers' wary glances softened into nods of acknowledgement, and eventually into greetings. He was no longer the cursed stranger. He was the quiet man who fixed things whose hands, though scarred, could mend a broken plow or set a snapped axle with an almost preternatural understanding. He had traded the ambition to command the universe for the profound satisfaction of mastering a craft. The seeker of hidden truths had found a universe of meaning in the grain of wood and the strength of stone. Liriel's hut became a place of quiet solace. She did not just heal bodies, she mended hearts. She listened to the worries of mothers, the fears of fathers, the secret sorrows of the young. Her empathy, once a conduit for the world's pain, became a wellspring of comfort for our small community. She never married, but she was a mother to all. Her gentle presence, a thread of silver grace woven through the fabric of our lives. And I built my life with Alara. The house on the sunny side of the ridge became a reality. Its stones fitted with my own hands, its roof thatched with help from Gregor and the others. It was a humble place, filled with light and the smell of baking bread, and the herbs Alara grew in pots by the window. Our love, born in a meadow under a supernatural sky, deepened into something sturdy and enduring, weathered by shared labor and warmed by shared joy. We were blessed with a daughter. We named her Leora, for the light she brought into our world. She had her mother's wheat gold hair, and I fancied a hint of the Empyrean's curiosity in her bright, blue eyes. She was entirely, wonderfully mortal. Her laughter, the most perfect sound I had ever heard. Her small hand in mine, the greatest power I had ever known. I thought my falling was over. I thought I had landed, found my place, my peace. I was Kale, husband to Alara, father to Leora, a man of the village. The memories of the Empyrean were like a dream from another lifetime. I was wrong. The reminder came not with a clap of thunder or a flash of purple light, but with a whisper on the wind. It was the year Leora turned 5. A sickness came to the village, not a plague of dramatic proportions, but a persistent, wasting fever that clung to the children. Liriel worked tirelessly, her herbs and poultices providing comfort, but she could not break the fever's hold. She confided in me one evening, her face drawn with worry. "This is not a natural illness, Kale," she whispered. So Alara wouldn't hear from the next room where she tended to a fitfully sleeping Leora. "It has a resonance, a familiar one." A cold dread settled in my stomach. "Raziel?" I asked, the old fear flaring. She shook her head. "No, not his. This is different. It is colder, more deliberate. It feels like a probe, a test." The next day, a stranger arrived in the village. He came not from the mountain paths, but seemingly from nowhere, appearing at the edge of the fields as the morning mist burned away. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in traveler's clothes that were too clean, too fine for the dusty road. His face was sharp, his eyes a pale, piercing grey that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He called himself Malachi, a scholar from a distant city, he said, mapping the forgotten lore of the high villages. He was polite, his words precise and cultured, but they rang hollow. He asked questions about our history, our traditions, our stories, but his eyes were always searching, scanning the people, the land, the very air. He sought out Anya, now ancient and frail, but still sharp of mind. He sat with her by the fire, listening to her stories with an intensity that was more interrogation than interest. He sought out Razel, finding him at his workbench, carving a new spoke for a cartwheel. I watched from a distance as the stranger spoke. Razel barely looked up, giving short, gruff answers, his shoulders tense. When Malachi placed a hand on Razel's arm, as if in friendly conversation, Razel flinched away as if burned. The stranger then came to me. He found me repairing a fence near my home. Leora was playing in the grass nearby, stacking smooth stones into a wobbly tower. "A fine day for labor," Malachi said, his voice smooth as oil. I nodded, keeping my eyes on my work. "It is. You are not from these parts originally," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I've lived here many years," I replied. "Yes, you arrived after a great storm, did you not? A most unusual storm." His pale eyes were on me, weighing, measuring. "And you came with 2 others, a quiet craftsman and a gentle healer, a curious trio to find in such a remote place." My blood ran cold. He knew. How could he know? He smiled, a thin, bloodless gesture. "You have built a pleasant life here, a family." His gaze drifted to Leora, and his smile widened slightly. "Such a vibrant child, a light in this rustic place. It would be a tragedy if anything were to dim that light." The threat was veiled in polite language, but it was unmistakable. My hands clenched into fists around the fence post. The peaceful farmer within me receded, and the watcher, the being who had once wielded light, surged to the fore. I met his gaze, and for a fraction of a second, I let him see what lay beneath the human facade. I let him see the cold, ancient light of the Empyrean that still flickered in my soul. His smile faltered. The confidence in his pale eyes flickered with a shock of recognition, and something else fear. "You would be wise," I said, my voice low and devoid of all warmth, "to finish your mapping and continue your journey. Our stories are our own. Our children are not part of your lore." We stared at each other for a long, charged moment. The air between us grew still and heavy. He had come searching for rumors, for echoes of fallen power, and he had found it, but he had found it guarded. He gave a slight, stiff bow. "As you say, I have overstayed my welcome. My apologies." He turned and left, walking briskly out of the village without a backward glance. He did not take the road, but vanished into the trees as silently as he had arrived. That night, the wasting fever broke. Leora's temperature fell, and she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. By morning, she was asking for breakfast, her strength returning. Lyriel came to my door, her face pale. "It's gone," she said. "The sickness, it vanished like a mist." It was a probe, and he withdrew it. Razel was there too, drawn from his hut by the same unspoken alarm. The 3 of us stood together before my home, watching the place where the stranger had disappeared into the forest. The comfortable roles we had carved for ourselves, the farmer, the healer, the craftsman, felt like ill-fitting costumes. "He was one of the host," Raziel said, his voice grim. It was the first time he had spoken of our origins in years. "A watcher," I confirmed, "but not like us. He was sent. He was looking for something. For us, the peace we had built was an illusion. We had not escaped. We had only been forgotten. And now, we were remembered. The past was not a dream. It was a hunter, and it had just picked up our scent. Our quiet life in the sun was over. The long, peaceful landing had ended. Now, we would have to fight to protect the heaven we had built on earth. My role was different. My connection was to the people. I became more involved, more present. I organized the harvest feast. I mediated a dispute over land between 2 families. I sat with the elders and listened to their stories, affirming our shared history, strengthening the bonds of community. I was weaving a different kind of net, one of unity and shared identity. A community that is strong, that trusts and relies on itself, is harder to shatter from the outside. Ilara sensed the change in me. She felt the new tension thrumming beneath the surface of our peaceful life. One night, as we lay in bed, Leora sleeping soundly between us, she spoke into the darkness. "The stranger, he was not what he seemed, was he?" I hesitated, wanting to shield her, but I had promised myself I would never lie to her again. "No, my love, he was not. He was from your old life. It wasn't a question." "Yes." She was silent for a long time, her hand resting on Leora's small back. "They are coming for you. For all of you." The simplicity of her statement shattered me. "I will not let them take us," I vowed, my voice thick with emotion. "I will not let them harm you or Leora." She turned to me, her face pale in the moonlight. "This life, Kale, with you, it has been a miracle I never dared to dream of. If this is all the time we are given, it was enough. But you listen to me." Her voice grew firm, filled with a ferocity I had never heard before. You fight for her, you fight for this. You are not the only one who has something to lose. In that moment, I saw not just my wife, but a daughter of this world, a creature of immense strength and resilience. She was not a prize to be won, or a weakness to be protected. She was my ally, my equal in this coming storm. The days turned into weeks, and then months. The seasons turned again. The first snow dusted the ridge, and the village settled into its winter rhythm. The memory of the stranger began to fade for most, becoming just another strange story. But for us, the anticipation was a constant, low hum, a note of dissonance in the symphony of our lives. The attack, when it came, was nothing like Razel's violent, clumsy outburst. It was not a storm of power, but a storm of silence. It began at dawn. A thick, unnatural fog rolled into the valley. Not a wet, misty fog, but a dry, grey haze that deadened sound and blurred vision. It was a fog that felt intentional. It carried a familiar scent, the sterile ozone smell of the herald's work was done. He had marked the target, and now the executioners had arrived. They came with the fog. 3 figures, tall and indistinct in the murk, standing at the 3 main entrances to the village. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply stood, emanating a palpable aura of absolute authority and cold judgment. They were seraphim, the highest order of the host, beings of pure, fiery purpose. Their presence was an ultimatum. The village did not panic. They simply stopped. The fog carried a compulsion, a gentle but irresistible command to be still, to be silent, to await judgment. People stood frozen in their doorways, their faces blank, their tools hanging limp in their hands. It was a terrifying peace. Lyriel, Raziel and I met in the village center, the only moving figures in a world held captive. We could feel the seraphim's focus on us, a pressure that sought to bend our knees, to bow our heads. They seek to isolate us, Raziel said, his voice strained against the psychic weight, to separate us from what gives us strength. Then we must remind them that we are not separate, Lyriel replied. She closed her eyes, and I felt her reaching out, not with power, but with memory. She poured the memory of a mother's love for her child into the fog. She sent the memory of a shared meal, of laughter around a fire, of comfort given in time of sorrow. She was fighting the Empyrean silence with the symphony of human connection. The fog seemed to recoil for a moment, thinning slightly around the edges of the village. Then, the central seraphim spoke. Its voice was not a sound. It was a concept implanted directly into our minds. The experiment is concluded. The deviation will be corrected. The fallen will return. The command was absolute. It brooked no argument. It was the voice of heaven itself, and it demanded obedience. I took a step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked toward my home, and through the thinning fog, I saw Elara standing in the doorway, holding Leora. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she was not frozen. She was fighting the compulsion, her love for our daughter, a shield against the divine command. Our eyes met. In that moment, I found my answer. I turned back to the seraphim, and I gave it, not in a voice of celestial power, but in my own, human voice, raw with defiance and love. No, the simple word hung in the dead air, a crack in the perfect silence of heaven. We are not going back.